That's true, Jay. Yeah. Okay. So I put a bunch of stuff on the agenda, but I don't want to dominate the discussion. So I wanted to start by just opening the floor to see if there are anything that we think we should discuss that we aren't discussing, or any items that came up, or concerns we have about the 1.7 release that we should try and talk about before we dive into some of the other. Is there anything that anyone wants to bring up? I guess not. Okay. Then do we want to, maybe we should do this in a slightly different order. Do you want to provide some updates on the extensions API? So I'm worried that the RFC conversation will take a while. I don't want to.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So the TLDR is that for forward references, the sidecar API itself needs some clarifications because of the override semantics are somewhat poorly defined, because they were never needed to be more precisely defined. So we, in the inverted API, we have clearer override semantics, right? You can do canary, and you can specify configurations for specific filters. If that is moved to the sidecar, then sidecar needs to have those semantics. So that's kind of one. Gateway attachment point actually works quite well. It is straightforward. And then virtual service is the only other attachment point which makes sense in a limited sense. The reason is, so the part that it absolutely makes sense is that many times people have a need to attach behavior to certain paths, right? So if it is some protected path, then apply some ODC filter, otherwise don't apply some ODC filter, or apply Lua filter or not apply Lua filter. So that is a common use case, especially at Ingress. So we do need to support that. However, we cannot allow you to specify a full filter manifest there, because that can lead to API which is impossible to implement. So you can specify, so that will allow you to specify things like one filter order for one path and another filter order for another path. And that's, you cannot implement that in Envoy. So I will, so I've done kind of a rough work through of these three resources. So I will send out something for review at by the end of the week. And the issue, I think, is that it's not clear to me if forward reference is the better API after all. So we really need to we really need to see if we want to do the forward reference or the inverted reference, the proposal that already exists.
Yeah, I have a question. Is there a doc or a diagram or anything that shows this? Because in the initial doc, there's only sidecar mentioned, and I mean sidecar itself is a backward referencing resource, right? So I'm happy to hear that virtual service and gateway are being considered, but I haven't seen it.
Right. So sidecar is sidecar is a primary resource. So the backward and forward references are considered with respect to other resources, right? So yes, so I mean, all our resources are kind of backwards in that sense, because the sidecar resource is going to select the workload that it applies to. And in this case, the forward reference is going to be from the sidecar to the extension manifest. So I will send. So I've kind of have a rough thing. I will send it out maybe tomorrow. And I think the other thing that I'm proposing is that we have a meeting of people that are kind of intimately interested in this as a working session, and we'll make sure that we have it at a time that's convenient to everyone. So I know Daniel and of course Neeraj and a few other people are interested in it, and then from our side, me, Kuat, and Doug will be there. So I think that we should book an hour. So I'm proposing that we do that next week. So next week, when we don't have our normal meeting, we will have a specific meeting for the API itself.
That sounds great, Mandar. I know the biggest hurdle in these APIs is sometimes getting the networking working group, convincing the members there, maintainers there, and also getting the nod from TOC. Should we try to solicit some feedback now, or do you want to do that after our one-off meeting?
So I think we can solicit some feedback now, but but the part that I want to finish and kind of have an internal agreement on is the two styles of APIs and what they are bringing to the table and what they're leaving out. And actually on the related matter, there is a requirement section at the top of the doc, and we haven't had an internal agreement that we are definitely committed to those requirements. So those are the two specific things that we need an agreement on.
Makes sense. So Mandar, whenever you set up the meeting, just add in the agenda that we want outcomes of those two things.
Okay.
Otherwise, we normally get derailed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll look forward to your updates and then plan for that meeting.
Yep.
2 weeks ago, this update on OC Tracer work, we had someone, I think, come in on the Slack channel and say that they were working on a prototype for switching to OpenSense or OpenTelemetry for tracing. Did that happen? Does anyone know?
I did not see a PR,
Okay.
and in fact he had basically implemented the whole PR in his own brand. So I don't think there was a whole lot of work to be done to submit the PR. So I will actually just follow up now.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be nice if the work was already done, if we could grab it.
Yep.
I'm going to lean on you again, Mandar. Here, do we want to provide? I know you were working on finalizing the monitoring and updating of for WazeMe, the extensions and distributions. Did you want to share out any of those details here?
Yes. So let me share that quickly.
Okay.
Actually, how about you go to the next one while I look at the docs and.
Okay. And Neeraj, let's do yours then first, because I think we have a shorter time estimate. Okay.
Pretty short. Just click on it, and you will be able to figure out what it is.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to look at this morning. I just didn't get to it for the meeting.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if this can be cherry picked, or are we considering Mixer in the earlier releases frozen? I just don't know the current state.
I don't think there's a problem with cherry picking.
Yeah, I think we can cherry pick just fine. I mean, it's clearly an important thing that Vinil found, and
Okay.
yeah, we
Thank you. So it's just 1 minute then.
yeah.
So are we cherry picking to like 1.3 and 1.4 also then?
Ooh,
Oh.
1314. That's
No,
a
no.
bridge too far.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I
You
didn't understand from Neeraj's comment. Like he said,
I was even concerned about 1.6 and 1.5 since
okay.
Earlier we had talked about, that Mixer is like an abandoned project. That's why I was just making sure we all agree.
Okay, makes sense.
Do we even have do the release managers still work on the 1.4 branch at all? I don't
Yes,
think so.
1.4 they do.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just this last one was the last time.
So 1.4 is EOL.
Yeah. Now it is.
1.4 is dead.
Yeah.
Sorry, they switched the hang up and unmute button on my meet, so I accidentally hung up.
Nice. Okay, yeah. So we're not. Yeah, there's no point in cherry picking it back because we're not going to cut new releases there.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Did you get time to bring it up, Mandar?
Yep.
Okay.
So just share my screen.
And let me stop presenting so that you can present.
Yep. Okay. So this particular doc is about like very specific problem, which is what are the different failure modes when you're distributing WazeMe extensions, and more crucially, what does the user do in response to that, right? So this is somewhat agnostic to what API you use to actually configure it, because it could be Envoy Filter API, it could be the new API that we're designing, or it could be the telemetry specific API, whichever it is. But so being able to categorize all the modes of failure and then giving the user specific feedback about what is going wrong and where, just enough so that the user can go back and then look at the logs and kind of do other things, right? So it has a very specific focused goal, and then we actually have kind of cataloged here different modes of failure. There are multiple ways that we're distributing bytes, and actually now there is another mode which at some point Kuat will present. But so there are inline bytes where the XDS server itself is pushing the bytes somehow. Then there is the URL fetch method, and then there is the out-of-band file-based delivery, which is like distributed file system or a daemon fetcher or something like that. And then the kinds of errors that you can have are, I mean, of course, none. Permanent read error, so you could not read it at all. Eventually consistent read, which means you could not read it now, but if you just wait a little bit for propagation delay, it's going to be fine, and now the error will be gone. The module itself is...
How do you know that?
Oh, I mean, timeout is the only. Otherwise, it's a halting problem. But no, timeout is the only way. So, I guess you only know it, correct. So you only know it after the after a timeout, saying, okay, you start with a temporary error, and then after timeout, you upgrade it to permanent, saying, okay, doesn't look like this is going to succeed. Invalid module means that the WazeMe model is invalid or compiled against just the wrong ABI version or something like that. And then the last one is kind of the more standard error of just the configuration was invalid, right? It did not make sense. Now, the interesting thing to note is that with inline bytes, if you send the bytes inline, then the first two modes of failure are a no-op, because the XDS server itself is like giving you the bytes, and if it doesn't, so basically the first two modes of failure are no-ops, because just by construction, the bytes are there. It could still send you invalid bytes, and the configuration could still be wrong. So those are still possible. I'll just kind of not cover this part right now. And I'll just go to URL fetch. So URL fetch, of course, has the other two modes of failure, right? You could timeout. Yeah, so you could timeout and the error becomes permanent. And file-based delivery is somewhat different. It will knack immediately and synchronously if something is not present, but it specifically does not support eventual consistency. So that's kind of another part of this proposal. But I don't actually, well, I'm having second thoughts about that. So let's not go there. The main upshot of this is providing a counter which is dimensioned by error type and filter config name. Which is dimensioned by error type and filter config name, where error types are these, right? Permanent, eventual, invalid, and invalid configuration. And filter config names are the actual configuration names that the user has used in the config. So now, just by monitoring this metric, right? So this will be a Prometheus metric, let's say. Now, just by monitoring this metric, the user can actually know so where the error happened, so like, and what kind of error it is, and which filter they need to go look at. It won't give them the error message and all that, but that's not the intent. You should be able to set alarms on this thing, right? And then with Prometheus, it already tells you which proxy had this error. So for example, if one of the proxies is older version for some reason, and that's why it said ABI, like that's why it said invalid module, then you would clearly know that you'll see a counter that says error type invalid module going up, and it will point to a particular proxy. So
do you think it's worth having the build version as part of the counter? Is it dimension there? Is that, if you think those are closely tied, should we just include that information in one place?
Build version of the proxy itself?
Yeah.
That probably makes sense. Do we have this information anyway because we scraped the job and the job has some information?
And there's the build metric itself but I don't think that the job will just tell you which pod, right?
Okay.
Or the instance IP, right? So it might, if you want to correlate the version, you might want to add that.
And Doug, do we want the proxy version or the ABI version?
Well, right. Yeah, dude. Unless those, yeah. You probably want both unless they're tied exactly to each other, right?
So they are tied because a particular build of Envoy of Istio proxy is compiled with a certain version of API. So the question is, which one of those two things is more relevant from an error
Exactly.
perspective? Yeah, I guess ABI probably is more relevant there.
Well,
Though it's debatable.
yeah, I mean, I worry, like, so if you tell me I have the wrong API, how do I know which version to go get to get the right API? Are we going to have that easily linked somewhere?
Yes, we will have it easily linked, but I think your question is still valid. Like, do you just want to present the most useful information right there, or do you have to go through several levels of indirection?
I mean, if you add more dimensions, you can have more information and they don't have to go multiple places. But I feel like,
So
I mean, either you add both or the most relevant thing. Feels like if you're not going to add both Envoy and ABI version, the most relevant thing is the ABI version.
The ABI version is pretty static. It will not even run if it's doesn't match. So there's not much you can do with it.
well, but Quad, if so the scenario here is that I download a module that is available in 2 ABI versions, and I just downloaded the wrong one, and now I tried to install it, and a few of my proxies said, "Oh, this is not the right version. I don't support this."
Yeah, I understand. It's just you can do that ahead of time, right? Like it's all visible in the module and the proxy, and it has to match exactly. So why would you even try to deploy something that doesn't match?
So, okay, I get your point, but we are talking about modes of failure here, right? No one tries to induce a failure kind of by design. So this is a case where
sure.
Yeah, this is a case where I just didn't know, and I tried to install it anyway. And how do I know what went wrong?
I think I'm just trying to say that we shouldn't focus on errors that are preventable, and this is a clearly preventable error.
Yeah, I think that's a different paradigm, right? Mandar, he's saying, I think what he's saying is we can do something beforehand where this ever will never happen.
So
or can't happen.
Well, okay, I think that's fair, but in a layered system, right? So yes. So for example, config validation can be done ahead of time, and all these things can be done ahead of time.
So I spent all weekend trying to work on something like this, and I had a lot of trouble with declaring functions as being external, and then it wouldn't read them. And I tried to see if I could come up with some config validation. I couldn't. What's going to be key is some kind of way that a user can tell what the problem is. I didn't realize that this was going to be presented today. I talked to Mitch Connors about distribution status because his distribution status stuff isn't working properly for failures with Envoy filter WebAssembly stuff. But I'm wondering if a CLI tool could pull from Prometheus and tell users about these problems.
So thanks, Ed. Yes, absolutely. And again, in a layered system, the focus of this part is simply to expose those primitives so that CLI tools or UI or I don't know, Kiali or something else can expose it in a meaningful way. So I think config validation for extensions is a separate topic that we do need to discuss, right? So basically config validation a priori. But it is only going to cover what happens if that thing fails and you actually go all the way in, and now you realize that there is a problem. So is
Right. So I was using WazeMe,
Mhm.
and WazeMe sets up mounts, and if you screw it up, the mounts are incorrect. The push arrives. It's rejected because the file name is invalid.
correct.
And what I discovered was that Mitch Connor's distribution status was claiming that all of the nodes had the distribution of the Envoy filter, but it actually didn't. It had been rejected. So he's off fixing that. What I'm wondering though is, say a user had that, they get this alert because of this metrics. How can we lead them to discover what the problem is? Right. In the case of WazeMe, everything was correct, but maybe the daemon set was screwed up and didn't read the cache properly.
Right. So okay. So I think that we need to look at that mode of failure, but I think that in that case, we would have seen the. So okay. So Envoy sent back a knack.
Correct. The pod became stale.
Right. Envoy sent.
So one bug is Mitch's thing, but I want to go further and help the user to see why it went stale, which I hadn't done it with Prometheus. I had seen it in the logs of the sidecar.
Yeah. So I think that the way to look at it most definitely is that these are all exceptional situations, right? And that's why metric as the first line of defense on which you can set alerts, and then the alert will tell you that there is something going on with this proxy or these proxies, and that's already specific enough for you to go and look at the logs, right? Because this kind of metric is telling you that a particular proxy trying to load a particular module and something bad happened. In fact, after this is added, even in the file-based mounts, we will record it as an error. So that's kind of the other part here. Because there are multiple ways in which we deliver, and some go into warming, some don't go into warming. This method of exposing this information in metrics is consistent across different ways that config is delivered, config and code is delivered.
Yeah, I think this is great. I want to work with you on maybe a command line to print out these metrics.
Okay, perfect. I think that would be awesome. Yeah, let's absolutely do that. And I am not sure how exactly this interacts with status, but you and Mitch have thought more about it than I have. So
let's leave status. I think there's another debate going on. But Ed is here, so I will let him talk about it.
I'm going to let you continue the presentation. I'll just make comments later on the document.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Actually, I think that's basically it. That counter. So the proposal is that we implement that counter, and which is automatically scraped by Prometheus. So we'll make sure that it's put in the right namespace so that it is picked up by Prometheus like normal. And then the rest of the story is we expose it. So CLI tool and Grafana dashboard.
Yeah. Hey, quick question for you, Mandar. So other than configuration error for a particular WASM or ABI incompatibility issues, is there a third kind that I can't think of for example, VM related issues that happen at runtime?
So any number of things can happen at runtime, right? But so, okay, this is not dealing with runtime errors.
I see. This is just distribution.
Right.
Okay.
So yes. So many issues can happen at runtime, and those will show up already in other places. But I agree that there is kind of more runtime status. Sorry, not status. Runtime metrics as well, as they pertain to the extension. So we can actually have a similarly dimensioned thing, like config name, and that tracks errors.
How about at distribution time VM incompatibility issues? And this is basically me going on a limb here. So is it possible that a particular WazeMe module can only run a particular type of VM environment?
No, that should not be possible, simply because the WazeMe VM actually abstracts out whatever else is underneath it. So yeah, so that shouldn't be possible. There are certain other kinds of failures, and we're not very close to getting them, but like once we have the whole capabilities based thing, whether you can read from the file system or not, right? So right now there is no ABI to read from the file system, but there could be. And you may have local policies that say you cannot read from file system, and now there is an issue. But I think that even in those cases, right? Again, these are exceptional circumstances. So in those cases, it's still important to have an alert that points user in the approximate direction, and then they can pinpoint using logs ultimately.
Yeah, that makes sense. Right, I got a drop. Thanks, Manga.
Okay.
This looks great.
All right, I'm done. Thank you. Yeah.
I did ask if we're gonna have proxy ABI version, should we monitor that separately? What you're talking about preventable, should we try and have a metric that exposes ABI version as well, just so you can see the status of your cluster in terms of compatibility more easily? Because that's one thing we don't have, right?
Probably. Quad, what do you think? I mean, it is very firmly hardwired to the proxy version, but yeah.
I don't think much thought has been given to that. There's only one ABI version right now, and it's just, I think we need to improve the platform itself, so we have a major minor version at least in the ABI.
Yeah.
Just no one has really worked on the version at the ABI level quite yet.
Can I ask about the runtime field? Because I noticed the Envoy filters we ship use the runtime envoy.wasm.runtime.null, and the ones made from Solo.io are envoy.wasm.runtime.v8. Is that, I know that's not the ABI version, but the runtime version itself, there might be language features. Do we want to attempt to validate or report about that?
That's a good question. So kind of ultimately going forward, the .v8 is going to be the main and the default. I mean, maybe the WaveM and something like that will come, but V8 is the proper WazeMe runtime, and that will be the main thing. Null sandbox is used now, but we will reduce the use of it as V8 and then that other pipeline improves. So we could potentially add the VM type as a dimension if that's your question. I just don't know where exactly we will use it and how does it help us in this sort of debugging. But maybe it does. What do others think?
It helps with migration from
Uh,
to VM.
It does help with migration. That's true. So, but does it help as another dimension here, or I guess it does, right?
It helps during migration, and we have migrated yet, so I think it's reasonable to have.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, great. So I will stop presenting now because Doug has another one to cover.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so the next thing on the agenda, unless there's something else, was this RFC for Telemetry API that I threw together. And mainly I was just trying to hurdle us towards our 1.7 goals, which was having defined Telemetry API. So I was hoping to get a lot of feedback, and I think we have got a lot of feedback now. So now we sort of have to make some tough design decisions. So if you take a look at the doc, I tried to capture all of the parts in various ways that we can configure telemetry in the system today, and some of the requests that came in form of issues filed by community users. And so this is my attempt at distilling out the set of requirements. It's been updated based on some feedback. And so maybe we should, I just wanted to go through them and see if people agree if this is the right set or if they think there's more that should be here or less. So the first thing, I want to have one way to control telemetry for Istio. I think having to learn a different way to do tracing, a different way to do logging, a different way to do metrics is just not a generally good user experience. And it sort of leads to sort of these fragmented implementations. So that's why I put that first requirement there. That goes hand in hand with the second one, which is simplifying user experience, right? You shouldn't have to change things in 3 places to get the telemetry you want. We should have a way that you can do that in one place or through one action. The next one, I was thinking at the workload level, but Peter and others pointed out that in the future, you might want to do it at the listener level or maybe even for external services, just to provide overrides and customization. I don't know, do others feel that way as well? Is that...
It's a so for telemetry, I mean, these are part of kind of complete description of where something goes. So yes, I don't know how common it would be to attach different telemetry to different ports, but yeah, I think it's possible.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either.
Health checks, I mean, that's a very common problem.
So okay. I missed that, sorry.
Health checks.
Health checks. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's true.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point.
Let me just put a note in there.
I think we should have health checks as a separate heading anyway, because I think, yes, this will solve health check if health checks are on a different port. But if health checks are not on a different port, we need to solve health checks polluting telemetry.
I agree, but there's so many different ways people do health checks.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I think that's fair. But I just want to make sure that then we do track just health checks as general as well.
The other thing I put in here just is that I think I saw this in some of the other docs as well. We're just being able to have RBAC-friendly controls and configuration. And I know Kwat, you had called out conflation over the operators. do we believe that the telemetry operator is different than the network administrator? And if so, should we separate those personas? So I don't know if others have thoughts on that or want to talk about that now.
So, so I think that, again, we don't need to support it fully, but yes, just like if someone really wants, if a particular user really wants to kind of go to that level of detail and that level of granularity, they should be able to. But yeah, we don't need to. Right.
My main concern is that network operator in Istio is basically God level. So adding anything to networking API is equivalent to making everyone God who has access to it. So, and that's not always the thing that you want for people to customize their tracing span tables. So there's escalation of privileges, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, can you elaborate on that example a little bit? So someone changes trace spans.
Right, so if some app developer wants to change their span tables, they shouldn't have to modify cluster level networking APIs.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yes, that makes sense. Now, that said, right, I think the trade-off we have to do is that if it leads to a complicated API, and this sort of requirement is rare, then you can always ask whoever has access to the network level resources to make that one change.
Yeah, right? I get your point, but I think the goal here is to make an end user API. So there's always a possibility to build another level on top of this, right? To enforce our back, but that's just building, more and more layers of in between you and the system. So if you're thinking of something like GitOps, yes, you can do that, but then your API is Git, not this. There's really no point in making another level of indirection.
I think that it's a matter of where we draw the line, right? Do we, like, how far do we go to cater to really sophisticated scenarios, and what does the baseline system support?
Yeah, it's my discussion. I'm just wondering,
Right.
like, if we want to solve new problems and make new capabilities, we have to do that. Otherwise, we're just building another level of indirection, and that's not really helpful, right?
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
Okay.
Yep.
Support all existing use cases, I think, that's pretty basic. The last one I added in response to the original design idea, which is just use proxy config. And I think that this invalidates the proxy config because the feedback I was getting was that we want to have it such that you don't have to restart the pods. We want this to be dynamic and to go out. And so I want to make sure that everyone is thinks that is a worthy design goal and requirement.
So proxy config requires a restart because it is used at the injection stage, right? That's okay, but so that's just from an implementation side. We can change the implementation, and maybe that won't be an issue. But I guess the more important thing is trying to get away from large scale and instant changes that affect the entire mesh. So in that sense, it's actually a feature that if you change something in proxy config, you do need to go through a very deliberate step of deploying those changes.
Yeah.
Yes, and that applies to extension API too. I think. I mean, it's a general problem that we
Correct.
shouldn't allow
It is a general problem. Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. So
you might want to add that the modus of failure is a cascade. You know, we have to stop delivering WazeMe extensions that look like they're correct, even though they crash systems. So we need to make sure it's possible to deliver configs for extensions via WazeMe so that it doesn't cause a whole mesh crash.
I'm trying to think of the right way to type that out.
So I think the extension API is going to be what's used as implementation of this Telemetry API in some ways.
Right, exactly.
So that
because
means extension API needs to support the features we want, meaning it should be possible to roll out config gradually for extension APIs.
Right. So it's actually interesting. In some ways, yes, it's clear that the extension API is an implementation of this, but we should not let the design or the current design of the extension API influence what we perceive as the requirements for the telemetry API. So I think that being able to push, canarying, right? That's kind of the bottom line. We should be able to canary changes, which also happens to be a major requirement for the extension API. But I guess it also applies here.
Yeah, I think if you're making sort of namespace or group, workload group wide changes, we don't really have a story for how to do this with single workload or selection, do we? And there's
that's a question how we want to structure it, but it just means we need fine enough granularity for selectors so you don't deploy mesh wide all the time.
No. And the interesting thing is that the way it is set up right now, with proxy config being static at boot time, inadvertently gives you that capability, because it means that your canary essentially is restarting some parts, and that's your canary. But Envoy Filter API, the thing that we use today to deliver telemetry, does not have that feature, so to speak. It's like instant and everywhere.
okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not sure where to go with the design yet because I still haven't processed all of this. But it sounds like
so Doug, the part that once we agree on requirements, and I think we do. Maybe other people will comment more, but the part that I would want to ensure happens is that either coexistence or so if this is implemented on top of the extension API, then coexistence is solved just by layering. If this is implemented directly in the control plane, then we need to make sure that it coexists nicely with the extensions API, simply because the ways these functions are actually delivered is still going to be extensions in many cases.
yes. So yeah, I was hoping that the extensions API would sort of get to a stable and approved station before we try and resolve this, so we could even decide if this was necessary on top of it or how it would fit. So maybe that's the thing. Maybe we think on this while we finish the extensions API so that we can look at how it would layer or start to design the layering now. And maybe that's my next step is to go back and show how this would layer over the extensions API.
Right. But from an actual API perspective, this is what we want the users to use to configure telemetry, right? I think that's kind of the question. So for standard telemetry, there's this API, and for anything else that's more bespoke, there's the extensions API. I think that's what we need to figure out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I guess the view of the extensions API, do we view that as something the user should interact with, or do we view that as an improvement on Envoy filter for which things could then compile down to essentially? Is that meant to be exposed to the user directly? That's what I don't have a good feel for yet.
Yeah, probably, because there are other telemetry providers, their own extensions, which they need to be able to use. So it has to be exposed to the user.
So I guess, Doug, your question is it the only thing that's exposed to the user? And do we actually create a more first-class telemetry API on top of it and expose that? So I think we need to think about that. I think Daniel last time mentioned that there is clearly some boilerplate that you need to do to use extension APIs with specifically WazeMe.
Right.
And I think even that time, what we discussed was, yes, we can always add a layer or some defaulting behavior or something like that on top of that API. So at least the way it looks right now is that the extensions API will be exposed to the user. So it has to be human consumable. But if there are better ways to expose like some functionality, then things can be layered on top of it.
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking was I'd like to go through whatever mostly final version of the extensions API.
Okay,
and see if I can flesh out 3 use cases, right? Configuring tracing for a couple of things and see what that looks like, and use that as motivation maybe to add another layer or to say we're fine with this layer for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for the feedback, and please, if you have more, add them to the doc. That'd be helpful. It's still a working document. It's not a final proposal by any stretch of the imagination. But I just wanted to get the conversation started, which I think we managed to do. And that's all I really had. Is there something else we should talk about with the last 5 minutes of our time? Is there anything else that someone has questions on or is curious about or wants to discuss?
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
Thanks. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.